Hi everyone, Leah here from EurekaCrystalBeads.com with another fun beading video for you. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to go check out the rest of our channel, and if you like what you see, hit the subscribe button and notification bell and you'll always know when we're posting new content. So today what I have for you is another fun project. This one is going to be a pendant, and I think it's pretty great if I do say so myself. I'm calling it our Noel pendant. And some of the things that I think make it particularly special is, first of all, it's using a brand new bead. It's using the little teacup beads, which are super adorable. We have a rivoli in the center, and I know people are always looking for ways to bezel around rivolis, which is actually one of my favorite things to do in the beading world. And then in addition to that, the particular beading that we're doing around it creates this lovely little star pattern. So I thought the name was just sort of fitting, the Noel pendant. We have some other Swarovski elements in there as well as a few different types of seed beads. So I'm going to give you a close-up of what all of those elements are. First, I have a size 11 Mayuki Delica. This is in a really pretty matte purple color, and we'll link you below to all of this that I'm using. Now I have a size 15. This is a Mayuki, size 15, like a nice metallic bronze color. And then here I have some 3mm bicones. These are in Aurum double, which is one of my favorites because it's just that beautiful bright metallic gold. I have some of those little teacup beads here. I have 5 little size 11 seed beads because that's all that we'll need in this project, is just 5 of them. And then I have a 16mm Swarovski crystal rivoli, and this is in the color Verdi, which I think is stunning and goes really, really well picking up on these gold and purple elements that we have in the project. And then lastly, I have Fireline. This is 6-pound Fireline, and I'm using a size 12 needle, and I will end up waxing it a little bit just to keep the tail stuck to the rest of the Fireline so it's easier to work with. Okay, so the way we get started and the way this video is going to be laid out is it's going to be a lot of different steps, but each step is pretty repetitive. So I'll be able to show you how to do that step, and then we'll cut from the video so I can get caught up and so you don't have to sit around watching a whole bunch of repetitive steps that you don't need to see 40 times in a row. So the way we're going to start is by loading on 40 of our Mayuki Delicas here. Okay, so I have loaded on my 40 Delicas, and I did also double check that I had the right count here, and I find it easiest just to move them over 5 at a time because it's easier to get a visual rather than having to count each individual bead, because it obviously is very important we start with the right bead count, because if we are off even a bead or two, this will not work. So you want to have 40 exactly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie my tail and my working thread into a square knot. So there's the first one, right over left, then left over right. It's like a double knot, but that second knot is backwards. And I like to bring them down together, just like that, and we get a little loop of Delicas here. And now I'm going to go through the first few, just whatever my needle kind of happens to poke through here. And this just helps to pull my knot inside of that ring just a little bit. It'll never be a knot that's in the way, but I do want to get that pulled in. Now, believe it or not, there are some tension issues that come into play with doing a rivoli. If your tension is too loose, so for example, if this beaded loop wasn't pulled quite tight enough and it's a little bit loose, that can affect your peyote stitch. If it's pulled too tight, that can affect your peyote stitch. So what I like to do to sort of make sure that I have the right amount of tension here is I like to make sure that there's no slack in the line. I can't see any fire line in between the beads, but the beads are still loose enough that they can roll in my fingers a little bit. And I find for me that that is what will end up working perfectly for my peyote bezel. Okay, so the basic gist of peyote stitch, which is what we're going to be doing here, is essentially pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. That's the mantra that you want to repeat in your head. So what we're doing here is even count tubular peyote. And so remember, we have those 40 beads that we started with. So what you're going to do is pick up one new Delica, and you can see the one that I'm coming out of. So if you want to imagine that the one that I'm coming out of here is Delica 1, we are skipping over Delica 2 and going into Delica 3 after we've picked up that new bead that we have on our needle here. So I'll give you a nice good close-up. After I'm almost done all the way pulling it through. Just like that. That's what you want to see. All right. You pull it down. You end up getting two Delicas sitting side by side. The new Delica we picked up, which now sits next to the Delica that we skipped over. So now we're going to repeat that. We're going to pick up another new Delica. And we're going to skip over the next Delica and go into the one after that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to you guys in a minute once I've gone all the way around. Okay, so I have now gotten almost all the way around. This is what we have here. And I wanted to make sure that I showed you the next step, which is called the step up. So many beading stitches have what's called a step up, and it's essentially an extra little step or an extra little bead that you'll go through that sets you up to start the next row while also completing the row that you're working on. So I've picked up my last Delica here. And if you go by the way that we've been knowing how to go through our beads, I need to go through this bead right there. But now, where to next? Well, I'm going to also angle my needle inward and go through the first bead that is popped up as well. So you can see where my thread is coming out of, and you can see that we've skipped over the next bead and we've gone into the bead after that, which is how I'd been doing the peyote all around, but then I'm also angled my needle and I'm going down into the first bead that's popped up in the inner part of my circle. And I apologize if my voice sounds a little funny. I am currently rocking a cold, but the beaders must not wait for another video. So give it a nice good pull. Remember, it's all about good tension with this. And this is what we got here. We have our little peyote circle here. So now what we're going to do is a row of peyote inside the circle, but with our 15s. And what that's going to do is, even though this is tubular peyote, pulling in with a smaller size is what will keep our peyote from creating an actual cylinder. And instead, we'll pull it in, or you can use larger beads and flare out. So I'm going to show you the first couple of those, just like I did with the first row of peyote. And it's actually a lot easier now because your beads are, the ones that you have to go through are the ones that are popped up. So let me get in there and then I'll give you a nice good close-up. And you can see how the 15 I just added sits right in there. And so all I'm going to do now is pick up another 15 and then go through the next bead that's popped up. So pick up another, and I'll give you another close-up. There we go. Trying to give you a nice good close-up right there. So I'm going to keep doing that all the way around till I get back, and then I'll do my step up. All right, so you can see how I've gone all the way around and I've added in that row of Miyuki 15s, and I'm just about ready to do my step up, which I wanted to show you again. So I have my last 15 on my needle here. Oops. There we go. And I'm going to go into the Delica that I would normally, but then angle it in and step up through that very first 15 that I added at the beginning of this step. That's my step up. Because we're going to do another row of 15s inside of this ring, which I am now set up to do because I'm coming out of my first popped up 15. So I pick up a new 15 and then I go into the next popped up bead, which is also a 15. You can see how that just pops right down into place. Ooh, let's get it focused here for you. There we go. I'm going to do one more of those for you. You can see how it just pulls right down. So I'm going to continue going around until I get to my next step up, and then I will be back and I'll show you what's next. Okay, so I have just about completed my step up for this row. You can see that my working thread right over here is coming out of 2 of those 15s in a row. That was my step up. So I'm going to finish pulling that all the way through. And you can see that again with those smaller beads, the whole thing filled in and pulled in, and it's just this flat little disc right now. And so what this is going to end up becoming is the back portion of the pendant. So our rivoli will end up sitting right there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through the beads to make our way to this outer edge, because what I want to do is be coming out of one of the popped up beads in this outer edge. So I'm just going to travel up diagonally. That's how you should always travel through peyote, is either diagonally or zigzagging, but working in diagonal motions. And that is the best way to get through it. It's also the easiest way that your needle will want to go through your beadwork. And then because I'm a righty and I like working counterclockwise, I am just going to go straight up right there to go through this bead, just so I'm working counterclockwise when I can turn this around like that. So, but essentially, however you get there, it's fine. As long as you're coming out of a popped up bead in the outer ring, that's all that you need to worry about. So now I'm going to do a row of peyote with delicas from this outer ring. So again, that's going to be picking up a delica, going into the next popped up delica, just like that. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and then I will end at that step up for when I come back. So there's that. There it is, pulled through. Let me get it nice and focused for you. Come on, focus. There we go. See, boop, pulls right in. All right, be back in a minute. All right, so I've gone all the way around and I'm just about to do my step up, which as you can see is going through those 2 beads there, which is the last bead that I needed to go through for this row of peyote, and then going right into the first bead that I added for this row. We've gone 1 full circle. I'm going to pull that through. And you can see that what's happening is as you pull tighter, this is starting to cup upwards, starting to form a wall. That's what happens with tubular peyote when you start to do too many rows with the same size. It starts to form a cylinder because it doesn't have the smaller size beads to pull it in or larger size beads to flare it out. But that's exactly what we want, because it's starting to create the wall that's going to go around our rivoli here. So I'm going to do 1 more row with my delicas going all the way around, and I'll see you back in a second. All right, so I've gone all the way around again. You can see we have a bit more of that wall built up. I have my last delica here, and I'm going to do my step up right now, which again is the last delica of the row plus the first delica that I added at the beginning of this row. I'm going to pull that through. And at this point, you can see how your rivoli will just start to nicely sit in here. We've created its little home. And now what's going to help keep that rivoli in its place is we're going to do a row of 15s on top, and that's going to pull that peyote in again, and that's what's going to hold it in place. So because my rivoli just sits in here nicely, I'm going to do that row while holding my rivoli right in place, and I can pull my thread nice and tight after each 15 that I add, and it's going to nicely pull it in and keep it all in place here. So let me show you the first few. I'll give you a nice good close-up. Again, this is just, oops, picked up 2 by accident. Again, this is just like the peyote we've been doing. Pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. Only the bead that we're going through is that next one that's popped up, so it's nice and easy. Get off that little rogue bead that snuck on there. Okay. You can see those 15s are starting to pull this in and form that little ridge on top that's going to hold in our rivoli. So I'm going to finish going all the way around and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I'm about to finish up that row, and you can see that I have my last 15 on my thread there. Let me get that focus to happen. There we go. And I've done my step up, which is going through the delica, and then the 15, which is the first 15 that I added as part of this row. So I'm going to pull this down just like that. You can see it popped it right down into place. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start the part of the pendant that creates that star shape right inside. Very pretty. So we're going to be utilizing the 5 size 11 seed beads that we had set aside for us here. I'm going to pick up 2 15s, an 11, and then 2 15s. Like that. And if you look at the front of your rivoli, you're going to see that we're coming out of one of the 15s, and those are the 15s that we're going to utilize for this next step. So I'm going to skip over the next 2 of the 15s that are popped up, and I'm going to go into the one after that. So just like that. So there's the one I'm coming out of. I skipped over the next 2 of those bronze 15s that are popping up, and I went into the one after that, so the third one away from the one that I'm coming out of currently. And that's what we get. Okay, now before I start the next little scalloped edge, I have to do one more little step, and that is going to be to go through the little delica right after it, and then the 15 after that. But let me give you a close-up of that delica. So we're going to go through that delica right there, and then we can also angle right up and go into the 15 right after it. So that's what we're going to do before we do the next little scalloped edge. So I'll pull that all the way through. I'm going to pick up my next little section of beads here. So 2 15s, an 11, and then 2 15s. Remember, skip over the next 2 of the 15s that are popped up, go into the third one away from where we are. Pull that down. Get our next little scalloped edge, and then before we do the next one, we have to go across the little delica and then angle up into that 15, and then we'll do the next one. And so I'll end up having 5 of these little scalloped edges. So I will come back to you in a minute with them all done. Okay, so I have just finishing up that last scalloped edge. I haven't pulled it tight yet, but I want to show you where I'm putting my needle after that. So I'm going down into the correct 15 to pull that down, and then I went down diagonally 2 delicas as well. So you can see where my thread is coming out here. Okay, let me get that focus. There we go. So I'm going to pull this down. And now I'm going to go up diagonally 1 delica and then down diagonally again. So all that means is doing this. Let me get that focus. There we go. So you can see where my thread's coming out right here. And then I went up diagonally a delica and then down diagonally a delica again. So your basic goal, as far as where you want to end up, is the little empty space lined up with the 15. Lined up with the 11. So let me give you a nice good close-up of that. All right, so you can see where my thread's coming out. It's coming out of now of a little empty space. And then 2 beads up from that is that size 11 seed bead. So that's where we want to be. Because now we're going to be plugging in, I'm sorry for the focus issues, guys. Because now we're going to be plugging in our teacup beads. So our little teacup bead's going to start with going up through the bottom of the teacup, like that. We're going to pick up our little size our little 3mm, size 3mm bicone crystal, and one little 15 as the stopper bead. Slide this all the way down. And we're gonna go back down through the crystal and the teacup and not go back down through that 15, because by ignoring that that's there, that's what creates that little stopper, like at the end of a fringe. And I'm gonna go through the delica on the opposite side of that empty space. So that way our teacup bead sits perfectly in that little empty space. Just like that. Okay, now we're going to travel over until we're coming out of that same spot underneath where the little scallop dips down, because that's where our next one's going to go. So we are going to be putting in 10 little teacup beads. 5 of them will be sort of lined up directly underneath our little size 11 seed beads, and then the other 5 in between those will be lined up directly underneath where our little scallops dip down. So all I had to do was go diagonally up through 2 more of those delicas, and now that'll put me at the correct spot for my next teacup. Now, something you can do as a little trick that will help keep your these little fringes stiffer if you have a problem with tension is you can go ahead and take your tail and you can pull your tail longer so it is the length of your working thread, and then as you do these fringes, they will end up having double the thread through them, which will make them nice and tight and stiff. So that's just a little trick that you can do if you have a hard time getting these to be nice and tight. So again, oops, I'm getting caught on things. There we go. So again, I'm going to go back down through the crystal and the teacup, and then into the delica right across from the one that I'm coming out of. And pull that down. And we get our next little teacup fringe. So again, I'm going to work my way to the little space lined up right underneath my size 11 right here. And I'll do another one, and I'll continue all the way around doing the rest of the little teacup fringes, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I have finished off the last of my little fringes here, and then what I did was I just wove, so I was coming out of right behind one of them. So this one was the last one that I did, and then I just wove diagonally, so I was a few beads away coming out from behind the next one. So now what I'm going to do is what I did was I loaded on a bunch of 15s. And if you want to know the exact count, this was 74 of them, but you should know that that number may vary slightly. So Miyuki 15s do differ ever so slightly from Toho 15s. Toho 15s are a hair bigger. So if you're using Toho 15s, the number would be a little bit less. But in this case, this was 74 Miyuki 15s. And what I'm going to do here is, now that I've loaded them on, I'm going to bring them in front of this fringe and then behind the one behind it. And I'm just going to maneuver this over in front of this one and then behind this one. And I'm going to go all the way around. And your hope is that the 15s that you have meet the 15s that you loaded from where you loaded them on. I actually think I might have one too many here. Yeah, I'm actually going to take off 2. So now we're down to 72 15s. I think 72 is going to work out a little better. So you want them a little bit tighter. And what I'm going to do to secure that down into place is I'm just going to head right up into the 15s that I started with, and that'll sort of make them go full circle. Oops. There we go. That one's slipping out of place there. So you can see where they are ending and you can see where they started. So we're going to head right in. And that's going to help to secure them all down into place so they will look like one continuous little loop. So I'm going to pull that loose again so you can see exactly where that happened. And then it pulls all together. And then that's how we have our little element on the front, which I did do slightly differently in the way I started it. So this one, it's a little opposite. So in this case, because there's two different ways that you can do this. In this case, we have this scalloped edge opposite this scalloped edge. And in this case, we have them mirroring each other. You can do either way. If you like this way better, when you started doing that little in and out weave in between the our little teacup fringes, you would start on the front versus the other one where you'd start from behind. You can do it either way. It's totally your call. So I'm going to have one way and one the other way, just so you can see the difference. You might have a preference either way. And now the last thing that we're going to do is the bail. So I'm going to weave through a little bit more of our little in and out scalloped edge just to help secure it, and then I will be back with you in a minute. Okay, now the way we're going to get our bail started, first of all, is that we have to exit from that scalloped edge. So I'd gone through it a little bit more just to help tighten up that edging, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to loosen this up again so I can show you where I came out. So I came out of the little scalloped edging, and then I went right into a delica that lined up right where my thread was popping out of the scalloped edging. I'll give you a nice good close-up here, and you can see it pull right down. So it does tack it down, but then it also allows you a pretty seamless way to now be exiting out of one of your delicas. So we're going to be doing a little peyote bail. You can see here. It's going to be flat peyote, even count, that we're going to work up into a long flap, and then you sew it back down into a loop, and we're going to add then a little picot edging. Pretty simple way to do a bail. So right now I'm coming out of one of my back delicas, technically the second row of delicas from the back. You always count diagonally, so this is technically the fourth row from the back of peyote, but it's the second row from the back of the delica portion of the peyote. And I'm kind of coming out right to the side of one of my fringes here, because then we're going to work the peyote this way, and that will help to center it behind that fringe. So I'm going to pick up a delica, and I'm going to skip over the little space that I have there and go into the next delica. And it will get a little tight in here, I won't lie. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of pony needles, because they give a lot of bend before they snap. So I'm really a big fan of them. So you can see where my thread's coming out, and then my needle just kind of skipped right over the little empty space, and we're plugging in a delica. So you can see where that new delica has started right there. Now we're going to plug in one more. And again, I'll give you another good close-up. Okay, pull that through. You can see that next one that we added in right here. Now we're going to turn our work. I always like to work peyote, flat peyote heading away from myself, so I'm always turning my work so that way I'm always heading with my needle in the opposite direction. So I'm going to pick up a new delica. We're going to make that little turnaround, and we're going to go through the last bead that we added, which was the delica. That was the second bead in our little flat peyote flap, the start of it. Okay, and then we're going to go through, pick up another bead and go through the very first one that we added. You can see how it's starting to form that peyote into a flap that's coming straight out from our bezel. And we're going to continue our peyote from there, heading out. So I pick up a new bead, and you'll notice one of the things I do, and this really helps me keep tight tension, is before I go through the bead, I take the thread here and I wrap it around my finger, and that helps me keep things nice and tight. Okay, so remember, peyote is all about going through those popped up beads. And then now we pick up another delica. We skip over the little space and we go through the one after that. Just like that. You can see it building right up. So I will be back in a minute with a little bit more of this built up, and I will let you know how many rows tall it ends up being. Okay, so I have worked up 24 rows of peyote stitch. You can do more or less, it's up to you. If you have an idea of what this is going to go on and you know of a length that will make a size 2 that's appropriate for whatever this is going on, then you can play with that. But this particular one, which is the same size as this one here, is 24 rows. 2 ways you can count that if you're not familiar with counting rows of peyote. If you start at the very bottom corner of your new beads added, so not any of the beads that are part of your bezel here, but your beads that are part of the peyote flap. If you go to the very bottom corner and you start to count up diagonally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you keep zigzagging up following that diagonal, you will end the bead that you end at, which for me ends up being this one right there. That's where it ends up coming out of, just heading in the other direction. That is 24 beads, so you can't go up any further beyond that. So that number is your number of rows. Another way you can do that is if you count the number straight up the side and then add that to the number straight up the other side. That's 12 and 12. That is 24 rows of peyote. So now we have to sew this down into a loop. So if you've never zippered peyote together, that's essentially exactly what it's going to be doing. So if you imagine a zipper, you have teeth that interlock. So if you have one side of the flap, which say is the very end here, you have your up beads, and then your lowered beads would kind of be right here. And then you have the very first row of peyote, which is down here. So they're going to end up interlocking like this. So the up beads on this side are going to interlock with the lower spaces in between the up beads on this side, and they zipper together. And what you do is you just bounce back and forth, zigzagging through the up beads from side to side, and that's what pulls them all together. So I'm going to show you that as best I can. So if you do want to do a different amount of rows than what I have here, you do have to make sure that you count up the same on both sides. So for example, if I went back across one more time, this side is going to have 13 beads up the side, and this side will have 12. That's not going to work for our zipper, because that means that in the very bottom right corner here, we're going to have an up bead coming out this side, and we'll also have an up bead coming up this side, which is what one additional row would add, and then they won't zipper together. So you have to make sure that you have a little lowered space right here. That is where the up bead down here is going to sit. So just make sure you have the same number up both outer edges, and you will be able to zipper it together just fine. So I'm going to fold this back, and let me get through my bead here. Try to give you a close-up. So you can see that's sort of an upper bead. If you turn this around and look at it from this direction, you can see that that would be an up bead that we're going through. And that up bead is what's going to sit in the little empty space at the very end right here. So I'm going to pull that down. And they sort of come together. Now I'm going to do this loosely so I can give you a good close-up, and then I'll pull it tight to really zipper it together nicely. But now I'm going to go into the up bead back on the very end of our little peyote flap. You can see those threads going across. And then I'm going to go through the next up bead on our base. Pull that through. Just keep your threads nice and neat here. You can see them going back and forth. And then now we go through the very last bead, our very last up bead, back on the tip of our flap, the end of our flap. Okay. And when we pull this nice and tight, it pulls everything down and it locks it together. So now we have that little loop there. Now, the one last thing we have to do is there's one little stitch of thread that we're still missing here. And you can see that's right there. So we're just going to head right into that bottom bead on the other side to add in that little stitch of thread that we need, and we'll work our way back to the other side. See, I pulled it right together. So now we're going to just work our way back to the other side so we can just add our picot edging and be done with our little Noel pendant. So here's where we are. You can see that where our peyote kind of joins down together, it kind of joins down to a single bead. Let me try to give you a nice good close up here. Oops. Sorry, just having some focusing issues. There we go. There we go. Okay. So you can see that both sort of ends join down to one bead, and that's the bead that I'm coming out of here. So as far as adding our picot edging, it's up to you whether you want to start going back up here and heading over, or if you want to start in the front and head towards the back. It's totally up to you. So you're going to pick up 3 of your 15s, because our picots are little groups of 3 beads that create lovely little points or lovely little triangles. And what you're going to do is I will start in just the place that's easiest for filming purposes at least, and that'll be at the back. Okay, and we're just going in the next bead backwards. And that gives us that little grouping of 3. Let me get that tightened up. Sometimes you may have to use your needle just to pop that middle bead up into that nice little picot shape that we want to see. So now we're going to just exit out the next delica. So we went into one delica towards the inner part of the flap, and then we're going to exit out the next delica so we can do the next little picot. Okay, so we're coming out. You can see the delica that our thread is coming out of. We loaded on our 3 15s. We're going in the next delica and then out the one after that. So I'm going to continue around. So this entire edge will have our little picot edging. I'll just weave to the other side, and then I'll do the same picot edging on the other side, and I'll be back in a minute. All right, there we have it, folks. So all I did was I finished up the picot edging on the second side, and then I just wove out my thread, tying some half-hitch knots along the way, and I find it most easy to do that right along this back area here, because I can really dig my thread in much more easily to make my half-hitch knots. So I did about 3 to 4 knots and then wove a bit more as well. And you'll notice that my tail from the very beginning was also woven in a while ago as well, just to get it out of the way. So we have our little finished pendant. Again, the only variation between the two is the long strip of seed beads as far as that scalloped edge. This was the first one I did where the scallop sort of is opposite the scallop on the inside, and this one, it lines up with it, whichever one you like. They're both beautiful. And lastly, make sure you're following us on social media, because you will be able to keep your eyes out and find out how you can have a chance to win one of these pendants. We are going to do a giveaway, and we're going to give away one of the finished pendants to one lucky viewer. So follow us on social media. We'll link you below, and you can find out how you can win one of these little beauties. So thanks for watching, everyone. We're going to link you below as well to all the materials that I used in the project. And make sure to visit us on over at eurekacrystalbeads.com, and hopefully we can satisfy all of your beading needs. Bye, everyone.